New COVID lockdowns in Europe, uncontrolled community spread in the United States, 5 days from the presidential election. Here's what you need to know. Good Thursday morning, everybody. This is Cheddar's Need2Know podcast for October 29th. I am Carlo Versano, and I'm here with, there he is, Baker Machado, filling in for Jill. Jill's off today. She's got some stuff that she's got to take care of. She will be back tomorrow. But in the meantime, my boy Baker, how are you, man?
I get so lucky when she's out doing whatever Jill Wagner does on a day like a Thursday, Carlo, to be able to join you on something like this. I love this podcast.
It's great to have you, Baker, and I think everybody loves having you. I think you keep it nice and light. Often Jill and I can sometimes get a little pessimistic about the world, although the world is fairly pessimistic right now.
Carlo, I mean, my God, I was telling you off air, I had this dream a couple days ago. The elections were over. There wasn't a coronavirus that was happening. People were living their lives. It was literally like heaven, and I almost was like, when was the last time I experienced that kind of a life?
I think I told my wife last night, I was like, I think I would not mind if you hit me in the head with a shovel just so I could be knocked out until at least next Wednesday, because I really don't know. These next few days, man, they're killing me.
Amen. Well, Carlo, let's get to the news, and let's start overseas. Germany and France are both going back into partial lockdowns. This as they try to beat back outbreaks that are now overwhelming hospitals in those countries. German Chancellor Angela Merkel acknowledged that the spread was out of control, and she's even ordered more businesses closed and restrictions on gatherings now for another month. Meanwhile, France taking it even a step further, Carlo. They're closing all non-essential businesses, and they're banning inter-county travel for the next 5 weeks. Now, schools will remain open in both of those countries, though, Carlo.
Yeah, so they're calling these lockdown lights. So it's not like a not like a full
Diet
lockdown,
lockdown.
but yeah, exactly. Although the France one is essentially a full lockdown. By the way, I don't know if you've seen any of the pictures coming out of Paris. Paris is under, I think, a 9 p.m.
crazy.
curfew. It's unbelievable. Look, there's literally nobody on the streets. They are taking it so seriously. It's astounding. Meanwhile, here in the U.S., the White House task force says the virus is in a state of, quote, unrelenting community spread in the Midwest, the West, and the upper Midwest right now. It's not a good scene. It's very hard to see how we're not going to need some kind of new lockdowns here, at least in some of these states. If we get them, that's another question. So, but Baker, Whitney Tilson, he's a well-known Wall Street investor. I think we may have even had him on Cheddar before. He writes a newsletter that I read, even though I don't often agree with him, but he's a smart guy and he's a thoughtful guy. So I take what he says seriously. He's one of these herd immunity people, and he's been arguing that we're closer to herd immunity than a lot of the scientists believe. I don't necessarily think that's true, but one of the things that he's been saying is that we're in this quote unquote burnout phase of the pandemic. And his argument is that we're seeing these surges right now happen in places that haven't had them before.
Like North Dakota, all parts of the Midwest, you're right.
So basically we had this huge surge in the spring in the Northeast. Then we had the summer surge in sort of like the Sun Belt in the Southeast, and now we're getting the this third surge in the sort of like upper Midwest states. So his argument being that once that we get through this, then the pandemic is going to start to slow and die out on its own. Again, I'm not saying I don't think that that's the case, but I'm just putting it out there because it is. It already is out there, and I think that it's an argument that at least deserves some debate. So I just wanted to bring that up, but it's a bad scene, and we've been saying this before. Hospitalizations it's not just about cases, right? Cases in a lot of ways are actually the least sort of interesting metric at this point. It's really all about hospitalizations. Once the hospitals start filling up, then you can't get these people treatment, and then the death rates follow. So got to keep your eyes on the hospitalization numbers, and they are climbing.
Carlo, I think I saw a stat somewhere that 1 in every 20 people in North Dakota has contracted the coronavirus, which is just like an incredible statistic given how rural that area is. And that's
like you have to try to get it in North Dakota.
Right, exactly. Great, good. That's a good point. It's also crazy because obviously we're headed towards an election next week, and it's interesting hearing what Angela Merkel or even Emmanuel Macron in France, how they talk about the virus, and then what we hear from President Trump, especially on the campaign stump over the course of the last couple days. President Trump continuing to reiterate that there's nothing to worry about. The virus is essentially in its last throes. But you have the president really hitting hard on this idea of that a vaccine is coming, and that's supposed to ameliorate any sort of concerns that people might be having right now about potential lockdowns or a rise in cases here in this country, that maybe the vaccine on the horizon will make you feel better. But I don't know necessarily, Carlo, when you see these numbers, that makes me feel better, because guess what? That vaccine, not out there right now.
And even if it is, it's not going to be, I mean, this is so dangerous. The vaccine is not going to be 100%, right? We have flu vaccines and we still have the flu. If we're lucky, this vaccine, assuming we even get it, is going to be 70%, effective maybe. So what does that mean? It means 10 people who get it, 3 people are still exposed. The vaccine is not going to be this silver bullet. We're not going to wake up, to your point earlier, one day and just be like, oh, this is over with. Time to go on with our lives.
Carlo,
We've got to get out of that mindset.
And by the way, and I want to put a caveat on this, because you and I are big fans, obviously, of The Atlantic. They had this incredible piece a couple weeks ago that basically said we as a country are not even prepared for the rollout of a vaccine whenever it's done. I think there's so much miscommunication about how people are going to be able to get this. It's not like you're going to be able to go to CVS and just get this shot and it's over with. These potentially might have to be 2 separate shots at different times that you're going to have to get. These are going to be 100 million people are going to have to get it. The rollout in itself is just going to be super arduous. And we as a country have never had the infrastructure built for a mass vaccine sort of system like this. So that's also something to be very worried about, Carlo.
Oh yeah, no, it keeps me up at night. But let's get there first, right?
Yes. Before we go on, move on to the market, since we're talking about Europe, I do want to mention this news that's breaking this morning, Carlo, out of France. Very scary. At least 3 people have been killed in the French city of Nice. That in a knife attack that authorities are saying has every indication of terrorism. This would be a second such attack in France, of course, in the last 2 weeks. I let our listeners know, of course, this is happening as we're recording this podcast right now, so we'll continue to monitor the updates on this.
Yeah, so Sky News, just quickly here, Sky News reporting that at least one of these victims was actually beheaded, which we know is what happened to the teacher in France a couple weeks ago. So obviously we should wait until we shouldn't speculate until we know more. But it's not going to be a coincidence that this is happening as France is in the midst of really a major falling out with a lot of the Muslim world. Emmanuel Macron has taken a very hard line against, after the beheading of that teacher, I mentioned Samuel Paty, who was killed by terrorists for showing his students cartoons of the Prophet Muhammad. Macron is out there basically saying that he's not going to equivocate on issues of free expression and the rights of French citizens to live in a secular society. And that's led to boycotts in places like Bangladesh, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, protests as well. So we don't know much more, but something to keep an eye on, and we will update you tomorrow if we have any more.
Carlo, let's move back here to the States, back home. The 3 major market indexes are on pace for their worst week since mid-March, if you can believe it, losing another 3.5% yesterday, despite a steady stream of corporate earnings reports that have ranged from not too bad to pretty flat out amazing. So what's happening in all of this? Well, it's the coronavirus, of course. Investors worry that the pandemic surging again, more lockdowns potentially might be in place, more restrictions are coming, and this time they won't be, helped and supported by any federal aid because we have no coronavirus aid relief coming from Congress, at least until potentially after the election. So, Carlo, this is why we're seeing a massive sell-off across the board. At one point yesterday, the Dow was down 900 points, Carlo. We've erased so many of the gains that we tried to claw back from that we had lost back in March when the pandemic really started to hit back.
Yeah, I mean, we're not going to do what they're doing in Germany or France in terms of lockdowns. We may need to do them, but that's just not going to happen here. We're not going to have one of these circuit breaker lockdowns. And even if we did, without stimulus, that's a recipe for disaster.
Totally.
What we should be doing, what almost everybody now agrees, including the Federal Reserve, is that we have to pay people to stay home. We have to pay businesses that have to close in these states where the virus is surging. That's not happening because our political system is run by people who honestly, I don't think they care. I mean, the fact that the Senate adjourned yesterday after pushing through Barrett on the Supreme Court and then just bailed out of town without even pretending like they were going to try and negotiate a stimulus deal, that tells you everything you need to know to me. So look, the big question, I think, does this market sell-off start to change that, right? Senators Washington, they pay attention to Wall Street. So could theoretically a lame duck Congress after Election Day get a stimulus deal through? That's the question. Without stimulus, we are headed down, down, down in a big way.
Yeah, the Federal Reserve, Carlo, is essentially pleading for more stimulus. Jerome Powell has used every lever he possibly can. And in many ways, you have to credit him for at least stabilizing the economy through this pandemic, because there's really no textbook for something on how to deal with the economy during a pandemic like this. Obviously, you can reference back to the Great Recession during 2008 and the Great Depression even earlier than that to kind of figure out how to keep the market afloat. But without any more capital going into the markets, Carlo, you're kind of limited in what you're able to do. So there's so much concern out there on how the markets will be able to stabilize. And to your point, we're going to have to see more people start selling more things off if there's no stimulus going in there.
Well, just briefly on this, Baker. I mean, one of the most fascinating things I think that's happened this year is, the first stimulus, what was it called? The CARES Act, the HEROES Act. I always get them confused. But whichever was the big stimulus that they passed back in April, I think. It was an unequivocated success, right? I mean, the American savings rate actually went up.
Yep.
Credit card defaults are going down. People were saving money. I mean, businesses were able to stay open because of the PPP. So, hopefully, if we have somewhat of a competent White House in the future, they'd be able to see that and say that it's in their political interest that there be more stimulus. I mean, I understand that Republicans are worried about the deficit and the debt, and I guess maybe that's a concern, but it sure as hell is secondary to the concern right now of businesses failing, millions of people being out of work, and no signs that this is going to get any better, at least for several more months.
Yeah, such a great point, Carlo. Let's talk about politics here and where we stand 5 days from the election on Tuesday. Tampa, Florida is the big scene of the dueling campaigns today, as both President Trump and Joe Biden will visit the city in a state that is a must win for President Trump. The Supreme Court, by the way, also will allow ballots in Pennsylvania and North Carolina to be counted for several days after the election. That, no doubt, a huge blow to the Trump campaign, which has been arguing, by the way, without evidence, that any votes counted past November the 3rd could be fraudulent. Now, this comes a day after NBC News has moved Texas from lean Republican to now an official toss-up state, which is incredible to say. The nonpartisan Cook Political Report also did the exact same thing. So the big question, Carlo, is, could Texas, by the way, Joe Biden has been polling pretty much 50-50 with President Trump in that state right now. Could Texas flip blue? People like Beto O'Rourke say yes. If only Joe Biden would go and campaign in that state. Same thing with President Trump. Both of them have not campaigned in Texas, really. What's going to happen on Election Day? And if Texas does go blue, I mean, we're looking at a scenario, Carlo, where Joe Biden might have 400 electoral votes.
I don't think that Texas is going to flip this cycle. I think that, eventually it is. The demographics just seem to show that. I just don't. I don't think it's there yet. But hey, I could be wrong, right? Back to something that you said about the president saying that votes have to be counted on election night. That is not true, right? The media has got to do a better job of explaining. Votes do not have to all be counted on Election Day. That is not a thing, right? President Trump is saying that he's sort of like moving the Overton window on this whole issue. It's nonsense. Remember, the networks and the Associated Press call elections based on projections that they're using from data and exit polls, right? It often takes days for the states to actually certify the results based on the ballots that are counted. Sometimes it takes even longer than that. Nobody should expect that we necessarily are going to have a winner on election night. And when President Trump says that he sees, ballots counted after election day as being potentially fraudulent, that is not true, and it's extremely dangerous to be putting that out there.
Carlo, we should note, of course, the Associated Press didn't even call the 2016 election until the wee hours of the next day. So it's not like President Trump got that giant call on election night. President Trump, we know, is almost a television producer, and he likes the theatrics, and he likes the idea of networks calling things on election night. By the way, there is a chance we could call the election on election night if, let's just say, Joe Biden wins Florida. The chances of President Trump and getting to 270 electoral votes votes makes it incredibly difficult for him. If anything, if Joe Biden wins Florida, it might be over at that point. But I could see so many different scenarios where this can be dragging on for days. There's even scenarios out there, Carlo, where both candidates could have 269 electoral votes apiece at the end of the day, making that one electoral vote in, let's say, Maine or Nebraska must win for both of those candidates out there. To your point about Pennsylvania, it's interesting because President Trump, obviously, the goal here, if you suppress the vote enough in states like Pennsylvania, a state, by the way, he won by less than 70,000 votes, that's huge because you obviously want to improve your margins in the rural areas. And if you can try to tamp down as much of the vote in the city area as you can, that helps him. But listen, every poll is showing that Joe Biden is up at least 5 or 6 points. But the margin of error in every single one of those polls is about 3 to 4 points. And pollsters say you should always give President Trump at least another percentage point based on what they call a shy Trump voter, which is essentially those voters who are too nervous to tell pollsters that they're voting for Donald Trump. So that's what happened when we saw with Wisconsin in 2016. Going into Election Day, Hillary Clinton was up in the polls on average 3 points in Wisconsin on Election Day, and we saw how that turned out, where all of a sudden Donald Trump won Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania by less than 100,000 votes. So the margin of error is huge, and if President Trump can try to downsize that by suppressing as much of the vote as he can, that works in his favor.
No, that's a very good point. I think that the watchword for election night really has to be patience, right? It's possible this thing is done and dusted one way or another, and we're going to bed at 11 o'clock with a new president-elect or 4 more years of President Trump, and that would be, I think, good for the country, at least in terms of, not being like mass unrest in the streets. But there is a not insignificant chance that that's not the case, and that we don't have a result election night or even the day after. So my big worry is what happens in that scenario if it's close, right? I think that President Trump is not going to just concede, right? I think that we have to get away from that. This is not going to be like other elections. I don't see any situation in which it's just not in his sort of playbook to admit defeat. So I don't see him, even if he's losing, I don't see him calling Joe Biden saying, "Oh, it was a fair race. You won. Good luck to you. I'll help you on the transition." If he loses, I just don't see that happening. I mean, I'm sorry. Like, there's nothing that he's done to suggest that that's how he would act on election night. Now, if he loses big, maybe he just bails out and he goes out to Mar-a-Lago on November 4th. But if it's close and you have states like Pennsylvania that aren't even going to start counting their mail-in ballots until the day after Election Day, then the question becomes what happens on Wednesday morning, right? So President Trump wakes up, he sees that it's close, or he's perhaps even leading in Pennsylvania, and he declares himself the winner. He just says, "Yeah, looks like I won." I mean, I've told you guys that the votes counted after Election Day are fraudulent. So based on the Election Day count, I am the winner. He's been saying out loud that this essentially is a possibility. So then what happens, right? Then do lawsuits start flying? Then we go to the courts. The deck is stacked in favor of Republicans, especially if it gets bumped up to the Supreme Court. Brett Kavanaugh wrote that dissenting opinion in the Wisconsin case, essentially agreeing with Donald Trump that election night is the be-all and end-all. That was, I think, very upsetting if you believe in democracy. Look, I know that this is major sort of resistance bait, and I'm trying not to go there. But the fact of the matter is it's plausible, and it's maybe even probable if certain things line up. I think people really have to be prepared that there's no winner election night. If votes stop getting counted, then we're in the red zone, and then it's God help the United States.
Well, listen, this is why Joe Biden's strategy, Carlo, to your point, because there is a very high chance that what you just laid out most likely could happen. This is why Joe Biden's strategy has been run up the margins as much as you possibly can so that way President Trump can't contest that vote. The worry is it comes down to Pennsylvania, and that is the state that decides the entire election. Joe Biden would then say, listen, I got to win Georgia. I got to win Ohio. I got to win Iowa. There's so many different pathways for Joe Biden to get past 270 electoral votes. And I should note, Nate Silver at 538.com has said there is a just as likely of a chance that Donald Trump squeezes out a victory at the last second as much as Joe Biden wins by an enormous landslide. That's essentially where we're looking at. Both things are as equally as probable of happening, Carlo.
Look, I just hope that we're a week from now making fun of me for on this podcast for talking for being so alarmist.
Yes,
I hope that I honestly will gladly take that. And my hope is that going to bed on election night, we know who the president is going to be one way or another.
All right.
I really worry.
All right, Carlo, switching gears here. What happens when a months-long surge in online purchases collides with the usual surge of the holiday shopping season? Well, you got delivery companies like FedEx and UPS still dealing with bottlenecks related to the pandemic, and industry watchers are now concerned about the possibility of supply chains collapsing under the added stress of all the upcoming holidays. Add on top of that, I mean, the U.S. Postal Service obviously also dealing with shipping goods as well, but they're also dealing with voting ballots as well. So there is a massive concern of epic proportions right now, especially because you have so many retailers out there, Carlo, that are not doing the typical Black Friday shopping season as much on a weekday or a weekend anymore. It's now the entire month.
Yeah, I think this will probably be the year that we see online shopping eclipse brick and mortar sales for the holiday season, which was sort of something that was going to be happening. But the pandemic has just accelerated it. This is actually a tip from Marissa, one of our listeners, who said that she had been hearing about this. So I looked in a little bit, and it is definitely a worry. Consumer Reports has tips for making sure how you can get your gifts delivered on time. I threw that in the newsletter today, but basically it boils down to the most obvious thing. Whatever you do, don't wait until the last minute this year. If you know you're getting your mom something, you know what you want to get her, just do it now, and hopefully it'll be there in time, right?
You know, it's so funny you say that, Carlo, because I am the last minute shopper. I am the person on Christmas Eve that is like standing in the line that is as long as people at the polls right now trying to buy my mom something at Barnes and Noble or something like that. So yes, this is a perfect reminder for people like me to start, I don't know, maybe tomorrow with my holiday lists out there.
I can't believe it's already almost the holidays. I mean, it's not even Halloween yet. Let's get through Halloween.
Yeah, you're it's so right, but it's so funny because I had to waste a little bit of time yesterday, and I had to go to a furniture shop, and I walked into a West Elm here in New York City, and they already had their Christmas trees up, and I wanted to say the exact same thing. I haven't even chosen my Halloween costume yet.
Yeah. That's not. The rule is November 1st is the absolute the absolute first day you can put Christmas decorations up.
All right. Well, Carlo, of course, I will see you on election night. It is going to be the longest night of my life. I'll be up till 1 o'clock in the morning that night, and then I'll do Wake Up with Cheddar the next morning. We're both going to be doing that election coverage, so tune in wherever, of course, you watch Cheddar, because we are everywhere. And Jill Wagner, of course, will be back tomorrow, Carlo.
Wait, actually, Baker, that reminded me to ask you, where are you going to sleep election night? I think I may just sleep in the office.
Yeah, well, that's funny you say that, Carlo, because I'm already calling dibs on the meditation room that is on the 25th floor.
That's my favorite room.
It's the darkest room. It has a couch in it, and yes, that's where I'm basically already putting up shop right now. I'm just going to spread my germs all over it so nobody will want to go in there.
We may be doubling up because
that's fine. That's fine. Bunk buddies.
It's going to be a long night, but okay. Anyway, that's what you need to know. Thank you, Baker, for filling in today. That's what you guys need to know for Thursday, October 29th. We will see you tomorrow, which of course is Friday.